Hi Greenwich, this is Mrs. Zabrowski. Today I am reading Throwing the Hammer from our Matilda book. Let's start. The nice thing about Matilda was that if you had met her casually and talked to her, you would have thought she was a perfectly normal 5.5-year-old child. She displayed almost no outward signs of her brilliance, and she never showed off. This is a very sensible and quiet little girl, you would have said to yourself, and unless for some reason you had started a discussion with her about literature or mathematics, you would never have known the extent of her brain power. It was therefore easy for Matilda to make friends with other children. All those in her class liked her. They knew, of course, that she was clever because they heard her being questioned by Miss Honey on the very first day of term, or the day of classes. And they also knew that she was allowed to sit quietly with books during her lessons and not pay any attention to the teacher. But children of their age, they don't search for deep reasons. They're so far too wrapped up in their own small struggles to worry over much about what others are doing and why. Among Matilda's newfound friends was a little girl called Lavender. Right from the very first day of term or of school, the two of them started wandering around together during the morning break and in the lunch hour. Lavender was exceptionally small for her age, a skinny little nymph with deep brown eyes and dark hair that was cut in a fringe across her forehead. Matilda liked her because she was gutsy and adventurous, and she liked Matilda for exactly the same reasons. Before the first week of term was up, some awesome tales about the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, began to filter through the newcomers. Matilda and Lavender, standing in a corner of the playground during morning break on the third day, were approached by a rugged 10-year-old with a boil on her nose, called Hortensia. "New scum, I suppose," Hortensia said to them, looking down from her great height. She was eating from an extra large bag of potato chips and digging the stuff out in handfuls. "Welcome to Borstal," she added, spraying the bits of crisp out of her mouth like snowflakes. The two tiny ones confronted this giant, keeping a very watchful silence. "Have you met the Trunchbull yet?" Hortensia asked. "We've seen her at prayers," Lavender said, "but we haven't met her." "You've got a treat coming to you," Hortensia said. She hates very small children. She therefore loathes the bottom class, or kindergarten, and everyone in it. She thinks 5-year-olds are grubs and haven't yet hatched out. In went another fistful of chips. "If you survive your very first year here, you may manage to live through the rest of your time here, but many don't survive." Here's the picture we have today of Hortensia and Lavender and Matilda in the playground. "They get carried out on stretchers screaming. I've seen it often." Hortensia paused to observe the effect of these remarks they were having on the two titchy ones. Not very much. They seemed pretty cool. So the large one decided to regale them with further information. "I suppose you know the Trunchbull has a lock-up cupboard in her private quarters called the Chokey. Have you heard about the Chokey?" Matilda and Lavender shook their heads and continued to gaze up at the giant. Being very small, they were inclined to mistrust any creature that was larger than they were, especially senior girls. "The Chokey," Hortensia went on, "is a very tall but narrow cupboard, kind of like a closet, I would say. The floor is only 10 inches square, so you can't sit down or squat in it, you have to stand. And 3 of the walls are made of cement with 2 bits of broken glass sticking out all over, so you can't lean against them. You have to stand more or less at attention all the time when you get locked up in there. It's terrible." "Can you lean against the door?" Matilda asked. "Don't be daft," Hortensia said. "The door's got 1,000 sharp, spiky nails sticking out of it. They've been hammered through the outside, probably by the Trunchbull herself." "Have you ever been in there?" Lavender asked. "My first term, I was in there 6 times, Hortensia said. "Twice for the whole day, and the other times for 2 hours each. but 2 hours is quite bad enough. It's pitch dark and you have to stand up dead straight, and if you wobble at all, you're going to get spiked by either glass on the walls or nails on the door. Why were you put in it? Matilda asked. What had you done? The first time, Hortensia said, I poured half a tin of golden syrup onto the seat of the chair the Trunchbull was going to sit on at prayers. It was wonderful. When she lowered herself onto that chair, there was a loud squashing noise similar to that made by a hippopotamus when lowering its foot into the mud on the banks of the Limpopo River. But you're too small and stupid to have read the Just So stories, aren't you? I've read them, Matilda said. You're a liar, Hortensia said. You can't even read yet, but no matter. So, when the Trunchbull sat down on the golden syrup, the squelch was beautiful. And when she jumped up again, the chair sort of stuck to the seat of those awful green breeches she wears and came up with her own few seconds until the thick syrup slowly came unstuck. Then she clasped her hands to the seat of her breeches, and both hands got covered in the muck. You should have heard her bellow. But how did she know you did it? Lavender said. A little squirt called Ollie Boggs Whistle sneaked in on me, Hortensia said. I knocked his front tooth out. And the Trunchbull put you in the chokey for the whole day? Matilda asked, gulping. All day long, Hortensia said. I was off my rocker when she let me out. I was babbling like an idiot. What were the other things you did to get put in the chokey? Lavender asked. Oh, I can't remember all of them now, Hortensia said. She spoke with such an air of an old warrior who's been in so many battles that bravery has become commonplace. It's all so long ago, she added, stuffing more chips into her mouth. Ah, yes, I can remember one. Here's what happened. I chose a time when I knew the Trunchbull was out of the way teaching the 6th graders, and I put my hand up and asked to go to the bogs. I think that's the bathroom. But instead of going there, I sneaked into the Trunchbull's room, and after a speedy search, I found the drawer where she kept all her gym knickers, gym shorts. Go on, Matilda said, spellbound. What happened next? I had sent away by post, you see, for this very powerful itching powder. Hortensia said it cost 50 cents a packet and was called the Skin Scorcher. The label said it was made from the powdered teeth of deadly snakes, and it was guaranteed to raise welts the size of walnuts on your skin. So I sprinkled the stuff inside every single pair of knickers in the drawer and then folded them back all up nice and neat carefully. Hortensia paused to cram more potato chips in her mouth. Did it work? Lavender asked. Well, Hortensia said, a few days later during prayers, Trunchbull suddenly started scratching herself like mad, down below. Ah, I said to myself, here we go. She's changed for gym already. It was pretty wonderful to be sitting there watching it all, knowing that I was the only person in the whole school who realized exactly what was going on inside the Trunchbull's pants. And I felt safe too. I knew I couldn't be caught. Then the scratching got worse. She couldn't stop. She must have thought she had a wasp's nest down there. And then, right in the middle of the Lord's prayers, she leaped up, grabbed her bottom, and rushed out of the room. Both Matilda and Lavender were enthralled. It was quite clear to them that they were at this moment standing in the presence of a master. Here was somebody who brought the art of skullduggery to the highest point of perfection. Somebody, moreover, who is willing to risk life and limb in pursuit of her calling. They gazed at wonder in this goddess, and suddenly, even the boil on her nose was no longer a blemish, but a badge of courage. But how did she catch you at that time? Lavender asked, breathless with wonder. She didn't, Hortensia said. But I got a day in the chokey all the same. Why? They both asked. The Trunchbull, Hortensia said, has a nasty habit of guessing. When she doesn't know who the culprit is, she makes a guess at it. And the trouble is, she's often right. I was the prime suspect this time because of the golden syrup job. And although I knew she didn't have any proof, nothing I said made any difference. I kept shouting, "How could I have done it, Miss Trunchbull? I didn't even know you kept any spare knickers at school. I don't even know what itching powder is. I've never heard of it." But the lying didn't help. In spite of all the great performance I put on, the Trunchbull simply grabbed me by one ear and rushed me into the chokey at the double and threw me inside and locked the door. That was my second all-day stretch. It was absolute torture. I was spiked and cut all over when I came out. It's like war, Matilda said, overthrown. You're darn right it's like war, Hortensia cried, and the casualties are terrific. We were the crusaders, the gallant army fighting for our lives with hardly any weapons at all, and the Trunchbull is the princess of darkness, the foul serpent, the fiery dragon with all the weapons at her command. It's a tough life. We all try to support each other. You can rely on us, Lavender said, making her height of 3 feet and 2 inches stretch as tall as possible. No, I can't, Hortensia said. You're only shrimps. But you never know. We may find a use for you one day in some, undercover job. Tell us a little bit more about what she does, Matilda says. Please do. I mustn't frighten you before you've been here a week, Hortensia said. You won't, Lavender said. We may be small, but we're quite tough. Listen to this then, Hortensia said. Only yesterday, the Trunchbull caught a boy called Julius Rodwinkle eating licorice during the scripture lesson, and she simply picked him up by one arm and flung him clear out of the open classroom window. Our classroom is 1 floor up, and we saw Julius go sailing out the garden like a frisbee and landing a thump in the middle of the lettuces. Then the Trunchbull turned to us and said, "From now on, anybody caught eating in class goes straight out the window." Did this Julius break any bones? Lavender asked. Only a few, Hortensia said. You've got to remember that the Trunchbull once threw the hammer for Britain in the Olympics, so she's very proud of her right arm. What's throwing the hammer? Lavender asked. The hammer, Hortensia said, is actually a ruddy great cannonball at the end of a long bit of wire, and the thrower whisks it around and around his or her head faster and faster than lets go. You have to be terrifically strong. The Trunchbull will throw anything around just to keep her arm in shape, especially children. Good heavens, Lavender said. I once heard her say, Hortensia went on, that a large boy is about the same weight as an Olympic hammer. There is Julius going out the window. And therefore, he's very useful for practicing with. At that point, something strange happened. The playground, which up to then had been filled with shrieks and shouting of the children at play, all at once became silent as a grave. Watch out, Hortensia whispered. Matilda and Lavender glanced around and saw the gigantic figure of Miss Trunchbull advancing through the crowd with menacing strides. The children drew back hastily to let her through, and her progress across the asphalt was like that of Moses going through the Red Sea when the waters parted. A formidable figure she was, too, in her belted smock and green breeches. Below the knees, her calves' muscles stood out like grapefruits. Inside her stockings, Amanda Thrip, she shouted. You, Amanda Thrip, you come here. Hold your hats, Hortensia whispered. What's going to happen? Lavender whispered back. That idiot Amanda, Hortensia said, has let her hair grow long, even longer during the holes, and her mother has plaited it into pigtails. Silly thing to do. Why silly? Matilda asked. If there's one thing the Trunchbull can't stand, it's pigtails, Hortensia said. Matilda and Lavender saw a giant in green breeches advancing upon a girl of about 10 who had a pair of plaited golden pigtails hanging over her shoulders. Each pigtail had a blue satin bow at the end of it, and it looked very pretty. The girl wearing the pigtails, Amanda Thripp, stood quite still watching the advancing giant, and the expression on her face was one that you might find on the face of a person who's trapped in a small field with an enraged bull, which is charging flat out towards her. There's Amanda and her pigtails and her braids. The girl was glued to the spot, terror-struck, pop-eyed, quivering, knowing for certain that the day of judgment had come for her at last. Miss Trunchbull had now reached the victim and stood towering over her. I want those filthy pigtails off before you come back to school tomorrow, she barked. Chop them off and throw them in the dustbin. You understand? Amanda, paralyzed with fright, managed to stutter, my mommy likes them. She plates them every morning for me. Your mommy's a twit, the Trunchbull bellowed. She pointed a finger the size of a salami at the child's head and shouted, You look like a rat with a tail coming out of its head. My mommy thinks they look lovely, Miss Trunchbull, Amanda stuttered, shaking. I don't give a tinker's toot what your mommy thinks, the Trunchbull yelled. And with that, she lunged forward and grabbed a hold of Amanda's pigtails in her right fist and lifted the girl clear off the ground. Then she started swinging her around and around her head, faster and faster, and Amanda was screaming blue murder, and the Trunchbull was yelling, I'll give you pigtails, you little rat! Shades of the Olympics, Hortensia murmured. She's getting up speed now, just like she does with the hammer. 10 to 1, she's gonna throw her. And now the Trunchbull was leaning back against the weight of the whirling girl and pivoting expertly on her toes, spinning round and round, and soon Amanda was traveling so fast she became a blur. And suddenly, with a mighty grunt, the Trunchbull let go of the pigtails, and Amanda went sailing like a rocket right over the wire fence of the playground and high up into the sky. Ouch. Well thrown, sir, someone shouted across the playground, and Matilda, who was mesmerized by the whole crazy affair, saw Amanda descending in a long, graceful loop on the playground field beyond. She landed on the grass and bounced 3 times and finally came to a rest. Then, amazingly, she sat up. She looked a trifle dazed. Who could blame her? But after a minute or so, she was on her feet again and tottering back towards the playground. The Trunchbull stood in the playground, dusting off her hands. Not bad, she said, considering I'm not in strict training. Not bad at all. Then she strode away. She's mad, Hortensia said. But don't the parents complain? Matilda asked. Would yours? Hortensia asked. I know mine wouldn't. She treats the mothers and fathers the same as the children, and they're all scared to death of her. I'll be seeing you sometime, you two. And with that, she sauntered away.